When I first tell my students that they will be writing in my social studies class, I usually hear sighs, whines, and complaints. Writing can be a challenge for all students. For English learners, or ELs, the writing process can cause even more anxiety. However, there are many strategies that can help your ELs learn to write. In fact, good writing instruction for ELs can benefit all students in your classroom. I have taught at the high school level for 7 years. Most of that time has been as a social studies teacher with diverse classrooms. I typically have many ELs at a variety of levels from many different countries. I love seeing them grow so much throughout the school year. This year alone, my students came from Colombia, Costa Rica, Ecuador, Egypt, El Salvador, Eritrea, Guatemala, Ghana, Honduras, South Korea, and Vietnam. They spoke Arabic, Chinese, Korean, Hmong, Spanish, Tigrinya, and Vietnamese. They were also all learning English. Each EL has a level of proficiency for listening, speaking, reading, and writing in English. Although writing may seem overwhelming at first, many of my ELs typically become pretty comfortable writing arguments using evidence. I tell my students that there is no exact right answer, and that I am happy as long as they are using supporting reasoning and evidence for their claims and arguments. It is usually really comforting for them to hear that they don't have to be overly creative for this type of writing. Gathering evidence that supports their argument is really half the battle. Here are 5 tips for how to teach ELs to write arguments using evidence in your history classroom. Tip number 1, meet students at their level. This step is really important. When I begin to get to know my ELs, I am in communication with their ESL teacher. Students typically have different reading, writing, speaking, and listening abilities. Getting a sense of what my ELs can do helps me set them up for success. Tip number 2, teach reading and listening with a purpose. Although these tips are about writing, I find that reading with a purpose is really important. My students annotate or use graphic organizers while reading. This is especially helpful when I expect students to later write arguments using that evidence. I may have a section in a graphic organizer for students to write evidence from the text, or I might ask students to highlight or color code evidence. Listening to videos with a purpose is just as important. Pausing and using closed captioning can help students reflect and gather evidence from that source. Tip number 3, model writing. I try to model reading and writing strategies as often as I can. In a recent lesson, I admitted to students that I have always struggled with writing introduction paragraphs and thesis statements. Most of my students agreed, and their struggles were validated. I modeled how to write a good introduction paragraph. We needed context, so I asked students to shout out when and where we were writing about. I showed them how to break down and restate the question, and we wrote a sample thesis statement as a class. Students of all ages and levels can benefit from good teacher modeling. Tip number 4, scaffold. Scaffolding is extremely important for ELs. In my classroom, we may utilize outlines, graphic organizers, or sentence starters. For some of my ELs, filling out the graphic organizer or outline is enough for me to assess their understanding. For others, it guides their writing and they're able to write full paragraphs or full essays afterward. Tip number 5, differentiate. I differentiate content, process, and product in my classroom. Finding topics that are engaging for my students or topics that they have some background knowledge on can be a game changer. The right topic can make students excited to write or at least comfortable. Sometimes I differentiate the process. If a student is a newcomer, I allow them to use their first language when writing. They can also use translators to help them or collaborate with other students. I also differentiate students' final products, usually by giving choices. Elle's writing does not have to be flawless. Allow for mistakes to happen, especially with grammar or sentence structure. These mistakes can become teachable moments. For some students, making an argument using evidence in a graphic organizer is enough. I can still assess their understanding. Here is an example of a typical week in my classroom where I use these 5 tips. In World History Projects Era 2, students learned about the transition from foraging to farming. On day 1, I facilitate a foraging simulation. This is a hands-on activity where students forage for food in my school's courtyard. By the end of the lesson, my students of all levels really understand the concept of foraging. It helps them move forward in the other lessons. On day 2, I explain the upcoming project a little bit so that the reading and video have more meaning. Students realize that they will really need to keep track of evidence so that they can make an argument later. We watch the video, Agricultural Revolution. We use closed captioning and sometimes even access the transcript to help students add evidence to a graphic organizer. On day 3, we read Transition to Farming, Differing Perspectives. Students add evidence to their graphic organizer. On day 4, I review the project expectations and the rubric, and I show students a sample of a commercial. We use it as a model and identify the commercial's advertising techniques. I may show a sample billboard, printed advertisement, or social media advertisement as well. This helps me provide options for students that are at various levels. On day 5, students finally begin their Marketing 101, foraging or farming project. Again, I differentiate the process and the end product as needed. The students will choose which they think had a better lifestyle, foragers or farmers, and why. From my own experience, if you're deliberate about incorporating these 5 tips into your instruction, you will see L's make great progress with writing.